Useless Beauty. Chapter 1. A fashionable victoria, drawn by two magnificent black horses, stood at the doorstep of the mansion. It was about 5:30 on an evening towards the end of June, and between the gables which fenced the courtyard, gleamed the sky, full of bright light, heat and brilliance. The Comtesse de Maupassant appeared on the doorstep exactly at the moment in which her husband, who was coming home, reached the gateway. He stopped for several seconds to watch his wife, and turned a little pale. She was very lovely, supple, noticeable for her long oval face, her complexion of old ivory, and her large grey eyes and black hair. She stepped into the carriage without glancing at him. Without even appearing to have seen him, with a grace so extraordinarily well-bred that the hideous jealousy by which he had been so long devoured tore at his heart afresh. He went up to her, and, bowing, "You're going for a drive?" he said. She let 4 words slip through her scornful lips. "You see for yourself." "The park?" "Probably." "May I be allowed to come with you?" "The carriage is yours." Without surprise at the tone in which she answered him, he stepped in and seated himself beside his wife. Then he gave the order, "The park." The footman leaped on to the seat beside the coachman, and the horses, as they always did, pawed and tossed their heads until they had turned into the street. The couple remained side by side without speaking. He sought how to begin the conversation, but she maintained so obstinately hard an expression that he did not dare. At last, he stealthily slid his hand towards the gloved hand of his wife and touched it as if by accident. But the gesture that she made in withdrawing her arm was so swift and so expressive of disgust that he hesitated anxiously, in spite of his habitual authority and despotism. At length he muttered, "Gabrielle." Without turning her head, she asked, "What do you want?" "You are perfectly adorable." She made no answer, and remained leaning back in the carriage with the expression of an infuriated queen. By now they were going up the Champs-Élysées, towards the Arc de Triomphe de l'Étoile. The enormous monument at the bottom of the long avenue, spread out its colossal arch against a fiery sky. The sun seemed to fall on it, scattering from the horizon a flaming dust. And the flood of carriages, splashed with the rays of the sun on copper fittings and on the silver plating and crystal of harness and lamps, was flowing in a double stream towards the park and the city. The Comte de Maupassant began again. "Dear Gabrielle." Then, unable to stand it any longer, she replied in an exasperated voice, "Oh, leave me alone, I beg you. I have no longer liberty to be alone in my carriage now." He pretended not to have heard, and went on, "I have never seen you look as pretty as you do today." She was nearly at the end of her patience and replied, with an anger which she could contain no longer, "You are making a mistake in noticing it. For I give you my word that I'll never be yours again." He was obviously stunned and overwhelmed, and, his customary violence getting the better of him, he flung a "What's that you say?" which revealed more of the brutal master than of the man in love. In a low voice, although the servants could hear nothing amid the deafening rumbling of the wheels, she repeated, "What's that you say? What's that you say? How well I recognize you. You want me to tell you?" "Yes." "Tell you everything?" "Yes. Everything that I have held in my heart since I became the victim of your ferocious egoism?" He turned scarlet with astonishment and rage. He muttered between his clenched teeth, "Yes, go on." He was a man of tall build, with broad shoulders, with a great tawny beard, a handsome man, a nobleman, a man of the world who passed for a perfect husband and an excellent father. For the first time since they had left the house, she turned towards him and looked him full in the face. "Well, you are going to hear some unpleasant things, but you may as well know that I am ready for anything, that I will outface everybody, that I fear nothing, and today, you less than anybody." He too looked her in the face, and a storm of anger shook him already. He whispered, "You must be mad." "No, but I will no longer be the victim of the detestable torture of maternity that you have made me undergo these last 11 years. I wish to live as a woman in society should, as I have the right, as all wives have the right. Suddenly turning pale again, he stammered. I don't understand. Oh, yes, you do. It is now 3 months since my last child was born, and as I still have all my beauty, which, in spite of your efforts, it is practically impossible to ruin. As you recognized just now when you saw me on the doorstep, you realized that it is time I became enceinte again. You are out of your mind. No. I am 30 and have 7 children. We've been married for 11 years, and you hope that this will go on for another 10, after which you will cease from being jealous. He seized her arm, and squeezing it. I am not going to allow you to talk to me like this any longer. And I shall talk to you to the end, until I have finished everything I have got to tell you. If you try to stop me, I shall raise my voice loud enough to be understood by the 2 servants on the box. I only let you sit beside me for this purpose, because I should have these witnesses who would compel you to listen to me and to keep a tight rein on yourself. Now listen to me. You have always been distasteful to me and I have always let you see it, for I have never lied. You married me against my will, you brought pressure to bear on my parents, who were shamed into giving me to you because you were very rich. They forced me to it by making me cry. So, having bought me, from the moment when I was in your power, when I began to become a companion ready to attach myself to you, to forget your campaign of intimidation and coercion. In remembering only that I ought to be a devoted wife and to love you as much as it was possible for me to do, you became jealous, yes, as no other man has ever been, the jealousy of a spy, base, ignoble, degrading to yourself and insulting to me. I had only been married 8 months when you suspected me of every treachery. You even let me hear you say so. What shame! And since you could not prevent me from being beautiful and pleasing, from being spoken of in drawing rooms and even in the papers as being one of the prettiest women in Paris, you sought what you could discover to cut me off from flirtations, and so you hit on this abominable idea of making me pass my life in a state of perpetual pregnancy. Until the time came when I should disgust every man. Oh, don't deny it. For a long time I understood nothing, then I guessed. You boasted of it even to your own sister, who told me, because she loves me and was horrified by your peasant grossness. Think of our battles, doors broken open, locks forced. Think of the existence to which you have condemned me these 11 years, the existence of a brood mare in a stud. Then, the moment I became pregnant, you too lost your taste for me, and I would not see you for months. I was sent into the country to the family seat, to grass, to pasture, to have my baby. And when I reappeared, fresh and beautiful, indestructible, as alluring as ever, and as ever the center of attraction, hoping at last that I was going to live for a short time like a young wealthy society woman, jealousy overtook you again. And once more you began to pursue me with the infamous and hateful desire by which you are tortured at this moment as you sit beside me. It is not the desire to possess me, I would never refuse myself to you, it is the desire to deform me. It is of old standing, this abominable and quite mysterious thing, the full implication of which I was so long in realizing, but I have grown quick to note your acts and thoughts. You are attached to your children by all the security which they have given you during the time I carried them in my body. You made your affection for them with all the aversion that you had for me, with all your shameful fears, momentarily set at rest, and with joy at seeing me grown big. Oh, how often have I felt that joy in you, recognized it in your eyes, guessed it. You love your children as victories and not as flesh of your flesh. They are victories over me, over my youth, over my beauty, over my charm, over the compliments paid to me, and over those whispered round me and left unspoken. And you are proud of it, you parade with them, you take them to ride in a carriage in the Bois de Boulogne, and on donkeys at Montmorency. You escort them to the theatre in the afternoon so that people shall see you in the middle of them, and say, "What a good father!" And repeat it. He had seized her wrist with savage brutality, and was gripping it so violently that she fell silent, a groan tearing her throat. And speaking very softly he said, I love my children, do you hear? What you have just told me is a shameful thing for a mother to have said. But you are mine. I am the master, your master. I can exact from you what I like, when I like, and I have the law on my side. He tried to crush her fingers in the pincer-like pressure of his heavy masculine fist. Livid with pain, she struggled in vain to withdraw her hand from this vice that was grinding it. And the suffering made her gasp for breath, and tears came to her eyes. You realize that I am the master, he said, the stronger. He had loosed his grasp a little. She replied. You believe I am a pious woman? Surprised, he stammered. Of course. You think that I believe in God? Of course. Do you think that I could lie in swearing an oath to you before an altar that holds the body of Christ? No. Will you accompany me into a church? What to do? You'll see. Will you come? If you insist, yes. She raised her voice, calling. Philippe. The coachman, bending his neck slightly, without taking his eyes off the horses, seemed to turn only his ear towards his mistress, who went on. Drive to the church of Saint Philippe du Roule. And the Victoria, which had just reached the entrance to the park, turned back in the direction of Paris. Wife and husband exchanged no further word during their new journey. Then, when the carriage had stopped before the entrance to the church, Madame de Mascaret, jumping out, went in, followed a few paces behind by the Comte. She went without a pause, straight to the railings of the choir, and falling on her knees beside a chair, hid her face in her hands and prayed. She prayed for a long time, and, standing beside her, he saw at last that she was crying. She cried silently, as women cry in moments of terrible poignant grief. It was a sort of shudder that ran through her body and ended in a little sob, hidden and stifled under her fingers. But the Comte de Mascaret decided that the situation was lasting too long, and he touched her on the shoulder. The contact roused her as if it had burnt her. Standing up, she looked him straight in the eyes. This is what I have to say to you. I'm not afraid, you can do what you like. You can kill me if that is what you want to do. One of your children is not yours. I swear it to you before God who hears me in this place. It was the only revenge I could take on you, against your abominable masculine tyranny, against the forced labor of procreation to which you have condemned me. Who was my lover? You will never know. You will suspect the whole world. You will not discover him. I gave myself to him without love and without pleasure, solely to deceive you. And he too made me a mother. Who is the child? You will never know. I have 7 children, find out the one. I had intended to tell you this later, since one is not avenged on a man by deceiving him until he knows it. You have forced me to confess it to you today, I have finished. And she fled through the church, towards the door open on the street, expecting to hear behind her the swift footsteps of the husband she had defied. And to lie crushed on the pavement under the stunning blow of his fist. But she heard nothing and reached the carriage. She climbed in at one bound, shaken with anguish, fainting with fear, and cried to the coachman. Home. The horses set off at a quick trot. Chapter 2. Shut in her room, the Comtesse de Mascaret waited for her dinner hour as a condemned man waits for the hour of his execution. What would he do? Had he come in? Despotic and ungovernable as he was, ready for any violence, what had he meditated, what had he planned, what resolved? There was no sound in the house, and she looked at the hands of her watch every moment. Her maid had come to dress her for the evening, then she had gone. 8 o'clock struck, and almost on the instant, there was a double knock at the door. Come in. The butler appeared, and said. Dinner is served, madam. Is the Comte in? Yes, madam. Le Comte is in the dining room. For a moment or two, she had some thought of arming herself with a little revolver that she had bought some time previously, in view of the drama she was preparing in her heart. But she remembered that all the children would be there, and she took nothing but a bottle of salts. When she entered the dining room, her husband was waiting, standing near his chair. They bowed slightly to each other and sat down. Then the children took their places, too. The three boys, with their tutor, the Abbé Marin, were on their mother's right hand. The three girls, with the English governess, Miss Smith, were on her left. The youngest child, aged 3 months, stayed alone in her room with her nurse. The three girls, all fair, of whom the eldest was 10, wore blue frocks and were like exquisite dolls. The youngest was not 3 years old. They were all very pretty already, and they gave promise of becoming as lovely as their mother. The three boys, 2 brown-haired, and the eldest, aged 9, already very dark, seemed likely to grow into vigorous big-built men, with broad shoulders. The whole family seemed to come of one stock, healthy and active. The abbé pronounced benediction, as always when no one had been invited to dinner, for the children did not come to the table when there were guests. Then they began dinner. The Comtesse, in the grip of an emotion she had not anticipated, sat with downcast eyes, while the Count scrutinized both the 3 boys and the 3 girls. With questioning eyes that wandered from one head to another, disturbed and wretched. Suddenly, as he replaced his thin-stemmed glass in front of him, he broke it, and the red liquid spread upon the tablecloth. At the slight noise made by this slight accident, the Comtesse started so violently that she jumped in her chair. They looked at each other for the first time. Then, from moment to moment, in spite of themselves, in spite of the revulsion of body and mind with which every glance they exchanged overwhelmed them, they continued to cross glances like exchanging shots. The abbé, feeling that some constraint, of which he did not guess the cause, existed, tried to raise a conversation. He scattered subjects round him, but his useless attempts did not hatch out one idea or bring one word to birth. The Comtesse, urged by her woman's tact, fell back instinctively on her social training, and tried 2 or 3 times to answer him, but in vain. She found no words in the confusion of her thoughts. And in the silence of the vast room where the only sounds were the slight ones made by the knives and forks and plates, her voice almost frightened her. Suddenly, leaning towards her, her husband said, "Here in this room, in the middle of your children, will you swear to the truth of what you have just told me?" The hatred that had fermented in her veins broke suddenly out, and answering the question determinately as she answered his glance, she lifted her 2 hands, the right towards the heads of her sons, the left towards her daughters, and in a firm, resolute and unfaltering voice, said, "On my children's heads, I swear that I have told you the truth." He got up, and flinging his napkin on the table with a gesture of exasperation, he turned away, pushing his chair against the wall, then went out without another word. Thereupon she drew a deep breath, as if she had won a first victory, and went on in a calm voice. "Don't take any notice, my darlings, your father has just suffered a great sorrow. And he is still very unhappy. It will pass off in a few days." Then she talked to the abbé, she talked to Miss Smith. For her children she found loving words, little kindnesses, the gentle indulgent mother ways that gladden childish hearts. When dinner was over, she went into the drawing-room with the whole family. She made the elder ones chatter, told stories to the young ones, and when it was time for them all to go to bed, she pressed lingering kisses on them, and then sending them away to sleep, she returned to her bedroom alone. She waited, without the least doubt that he would come. And now that her children were far from her, she determined to defend her mortal body as she had defended her life as a society woman. And in the pocket of her gown she hid the little loaded revolver that she had bought some days before. Hours passed, clocks struck. All the noises of the house died down. Only the carriages continued to rush down the streets with a confused rumbling, faint and far off through the thickness of the walls. She waited, wide awake and poised, not afraid of him now, prepared for anything and almost triumphant, since she had found for him a torture that he would feel every moment throughout his life. But the first gleam of daylight had slipped through the fringed border of her curtains, and still he had not come to her. Then, stunned, she realized that he was not coming. Locking her door and thrusting across it the safety bolt that she had fixed, she went to bed at last and lay there with wide-open eyes, thinking, unable to understand now. Unable to guess what he was going to do. Her maid, bringing in her tea, gave her a letter from her husband. He informed her that he was going on a very long voyage and announced in a postscript that his lawyer would supply her with all the money she required for her expenses. Chapter 3. It was at the opera, during an entr'acte of Robert le Diable. In the stalls, men stood up, hats on their heads, low-cut waistcoats revealing white shirts on which shone gold or jeweled studs, and looked round at the boxes full of women in evening dress. Covered with diamonds and pearls, displayed in this brilliantly lighted greenhouse where lovely faces and gleaming shoulders seemed blossoming for all eyes to gaze on. In the midst of the music and the human voices, two friends, their backs turned to the orchestra, were quizzing, as they talked, all this gallery of elegance, all this exhibition of true or artificial charm, jewels, luxury and ostentation that spread itself in a circle round the great theatre. One of them, Roger de Salins, said to his companion, Bernard Grandin, "Look at the Comtesse de Mascaret, as lovely as ever." The other man turned to stare at the tall woman in the opposite box. She looked still very young, and her startling beauty seemed to draw all eyes from every corner of the theatre. Her pale complexion, with its ivory gleams, gave her the look of a statue, while in her hair, which was black as night, a slender rainbow-shaped diadem, powdered with diamonds, glittered like a Milky Way. When he had looked at her for some time, Bernard Grandin replied with a humorous accent of sincere conviction, "I'll grant you that she's lovely. How old will she be now? Wait. I can tell you exactly. I have known her since her childhood. I saw her make her entry into society as a young girl. She is 36 years old. It's impossible. I'm sure of it. She looks 25. She has had 7 children. It's incredible. They are all 7 alive too, and she's an admirable mother. I visit the house sometimes. It's a pleasant house, very quiet and restful. She achieves the difficult art of being a mother and a social being. Odd, isn't it? And there's never been any talk about her? Never. But what about her husband? He's a strange man, isn't he? Yes and no. There may have been some little incident between them, one of those little domestic incidents that one suspects, never hearing the whole story but guessing it fairly accurately. What was it? I don't know anything about it myself. Mascaret is very much the man about town nowadays after having been a perfect husband. During all the time that he was a thoroughly good husband, he had a thoroughly bad disposition, suspicious and surly. Since he took to a gay life, he has become quite careless, but one feels that he has some worry, some grief, a gnawing canker of some kind. He is aging very much, he is. For a few minutes the two friends philosophized on the secret troubles, impossible to understand, that differences of character or perhaps physical antipathies, unnoticed at first, can create in a family. Roger de Salins, who was still eyeing Madame de Mascaret, added, "It is incomprehensible that this woman has had 7 children. Yes, in 11 years. After which she made an end, at the age of 30, of her period of reproduction, in order to enter on the brilliant period of display, which seems far from finishing. Poor women. Why do you pity them? Why? Oh, my dear, think of it. 11 years of pregnancy for a woman like that. What a hell. It's the whole of her youth, all her beauty, her every hope of success, the whole romantic ideal of the brilliance of life. That is sacrificed to this abominable law of reproduction which turns the normal woman into a mere egg-laying machine. What's to be done? That's only nature. Yes, but I say that nature is our enemy, that we must fight all our lives against nature, because she never ceases to force us back and back to the beast.
Whatever there is of decency, of beauty, of graciousness, of idealism, on earth, was not put there by God, but by man, by man's brain. It is we who have introduced into the created world some little grace, beauty, a charm foreign to it, and mystery, by the songs we sing of it, the interpretations we offer. By the admiration of poets, the idealizations of artists, and the explanations of scientists who are deluded but who do find ingenious reasons for phenomena. God has created only gross creatures, full of the germs of disease, who after a few years of animal development grow old in infirmity, with all the ugliness and all the impotence of human decrepitude. He made them, it seems, only to reproduce themselves in a revolting fashion and thereafter to die, like the ephemeral insects of summer evenings. I said, to reproduce themselves in a revolting fashion, I repeat it. What is indeed more shameful, more repugnant than the filthy and ridiculous act of human reproduction, from which all delicate sensibilities shrink and will always shrink in disgust? Since all the organs invented by this economical and malignant Creator serve two purposes, why did he not choose others, that were not ill-suited and defiled, to which to entrust this sacred mission? The noblest and most uplifting of all human functions? The mouth that nourishes the body with material food, is also the medium of words and thoughts. The flesh is restored by it at the same time that it gives expression to the intelligence. The sense of smell, which gives the lungs their vital air, gives the brain all the perfumes in the world, the scent of flowers, woods, trees, the sea. The ear which puts us in communication with our fellow beings, has also made it possible for us to invent music, to create from its sounds imagination, happiness, the infinite, and even physical pleasure. But one would suppose that a malicious and cynical Creator had wished to prevent man from ever ennobling, beautifying and idealizing his relations with women. Nevertheless, man found love, which is not so bad as a reply to a God who is a cheat, and he has so endowed it with poetical conceits that woman often forgets to what contacts she is forced. Those among us who are powerless to delude ourselves by self-idealization, have invented vice and refined debauch, which is yet another way of making a fool of God and rendering a wanton homage to beauty. But the normal human being makes children like a beast mated by law. Look at this woman. Isn't it abominable to think that this jewel, this pearl born to be beautiful, admired, fêted and adored, has passed 11 years of her life in giving airs to the Comte de Mascaret? Bernard Grandin said, laughing. There's a good deal of truth in that, but few people would understand you. Sirens became excited. Do you know my conception of God? Said he. A monstrous creative organ unknown to us, who sows millions of worlds through space as a single fish lays eggs in the sea. He creates because that is his God function, but he is ignorant of what he does, senselessly prolific, unconscious of the multitudinous combinations produced by his scattered germs. Human thought is a happy little accident born of the chances of his fecundities, a local accident, passing and unforeseen, condemned to disappear with the earth, and to begin again, perhaps, here or elsewhere, the same or different, with the new combinations of the eternal re-beginnings. It is due to this little accident of intelligence, that we exist ill at ease in a state of being not made for us, which had not been prepared to receive, house, nourish and content thinking beings, and it is due to this too that we have to fight without rest, such of us as are truly refined and civilized, against what are still called the designs of Providence. Grandin, who was listening to him attentively, knowing of old the startling leaps of his imagination, asked him, So you believe that human thought is a spontaneous product of the blind parturition of God? Why not? A fortuitous function of the nervous centers of our brains, similar to unforeseen chemical actions due to new combinations, similar to a manifestation of electricity, created by friction or by unexpected contiguities, in short to all the phenomena engendered by the infinite and fecund fermentations of living matter. But, my dear, the proof leaps to the eye of anyone who looks round him. If human thought, willed by a conscious Creator,
had been intended to be that which it has become, quite different from the thought and the resignation of the beasts, exacting, questing, disturbed, tormented. Would the world created to receive the creatures that we are today have been this uncomfortable little park for small beasties, this salad bed, this stony, spherical, sylvan kitchen garden, where your short-sighted providence had destined us to live naked, in caves or under trees, nourished by the murdered flesh of the animals, our brothers, or the raw vegetables growing in sun and rain. But it only requires a second's reflection to realize that this world is not made for creatures like us. Thought, hatched and developed by a miraculous quality of the nerves of our brain cells, quite powerless, ignorant and confused as it is and will always remain, makes us all intellectuals of the world of the ideal, and miserable exiles in this world. Contemplate this world, in the state in which God gave it to the beings who dwell thereon. Is it not visibly and solely designed, planted and wooded for animals? What is there for us? Nothing. And for them, all, caves, trees, leafy places, rivers, watering places, food and drink. So that fastidious people like me are never happy there. Only men who approximate to the brutes are content and satisfied. But the others, poets, squeamish creatures, dreamers, seekers, restless beings, oh, poor wretches. I eat cabbages and carrots, damn it, onions, turnips and radishes, because we have been constrained to accustom ourselves to them, even to acquire a taste for them, and because nothing else grows. But these things are a food fit only for rabbits and goats, as grass and clover are food for horses and cows. When I look at the ears of a field of ripe corn, I don't doubt but that it has germinated in the soil for the beaks of sparrows and larks, but not for my mouth. So when I masticate bread I am robbing the birds, as I am robbing the weasel and the fox in eating poultry. Are not quail, pigeon and partridge the natural prey of the hawk? Sheep, venison and beef the prey of the great carnivorous beasts, rather than meats fattened for us to be served roasted with truffles that have been disinterred especially for us by the pigs? Animals have nothing to do but live here, my dear. They are in their own place, sheltered and fed, they have only to browse or hunt or eat each other, following the promptings of their instincts. For God never foresaw gentleness and peaceful way, he foresaw only the death of creatures impelled to destroy and devour each other. As for us, oh, we have had to use labor, effort, patience, invention, imagination, industry, talent, and genius to make this root-bound stony soil something like a dwelling place. Think what we have done, in spite of nature, in opposition to nature, to establish ourselves in barely tolerable conditions, hardly decent, hardly comfortable, hardly elegant, unworthy of us. And the more civilized, intelligent and refined we are, the more we must vanquish and tame the animal instinct that represents the will of God in us. Consider how we have had to invent civilization, which includes so many things, so very many things of all kinds, from socks to telephones. Think of all the things you see every day, all the things that are useful to us in every sort of way. To soften our brutish fate, we have discovered and manufactured everything, beginning with houses, and going on to delicate foods, sweets, cakes, drinks, liqueurs, tapestries, clothing, ornaments, beds, hair mattresses, carriages, railways, innumerable machines, more, we have discovered science and art, writing and poetry. Yes, we have created the arts, poetry, music, painting. Everything that belongs to the imagination comes from us, and all the gay conceits of life, feminine dress and masculine talent, which has managed to make the merely reproductive existence, for which alone a divine providence gave us life, a little more beautiful in our eyes, a little less naked, less monotonous and less harsh. Look at this theater. Is there not here a human world created by us, unforeseen by the eternal fates, unknown to them, comprehensible to our minds alone, a gay titillation of mind and senses? Created solely for us and by the feeble discontented restless animal that we are? Look at this woman, Madame de Mascaret. God had made her to live in a cave, naked, or clothed in the skins of beasts. Isn't she better like this? But, talking of her, who knows why or how her brute of a husband, having had a woman like that for a companion and especially after having been uncouth enough to make her 7 times a mother, abandoned her all at once to run after loose women? Grandin replied. Oh, my dear, that's probably the only reason. He discovered at last that sleeping in his own bed costs him too much. He has arrived by way of domestic economy at the same theories you hold philosophically. The bell rang 3 times for the last act. The 2 friends turned round, removed their hats and took their seats. Chapter 4. Side by side in the brougham that took them back to their house after the performance at the opera, the Comte and Comtesse de Mascaret sat in silence. But suddenly the husband said to his wife, "Gabrielle. What is it? Don't you think this has lasted long enough?" "What?" "The abominable torture to which you have condemned me for 6 years. Well, I can't do anything about it. At least, tell me which one it is." "Never. Think how I can no longer see my children or feel them round me without my heart being wrung by this doubt. Tell me which it is, and I swear I will forgive and that I'll treat it just like the others. I haven't the right to do it. Don't you see that I can't endure this life any longer, this gnawing thought, this question that I never cease to ask myself, this question that tortures me every time I look at them? I shall go mad." She asked. "So you have suffered deeply?" "Frightfully. Would I otherwise have endured the horror of living beside you, and the still worse horror of feeling, of knowing that there is one such child among them, whom I can't recognize? And who makes it impossible for me to love the others?" She repeated. "So, you really have suffered very much?" He answered in a sad restrained voice. "Don't I tell you every day that it is an intolerable torture to me? But for that, would I have come back, would I have remained in this house, near you and near them, if I had not loved them, my children? Oh, you have behaved towards me in a shameful way. The only passion of my heart is for my children, you know it well. I feel for them as a father of olden days, as I was for you the husband of an older ideal of family life, for I remain a man of instinct, a man of nature, a man of an earlier day. Yes, I own it. You made me terribly jealous, because you are a woman of another race, another spirit, with other needs. Oh, I shall never forget the things you said to me. From that day, moreover, I cared no more what you did. I did not kill you because that would have deprived me of the last means on earth by which I could find out which of your children is not mine. I have waited, but I have suffered more than you would believe, for I dare not love them now, except perhaps the eldest. I daren't look at them now, call them, embrace them. I can't take one of them on my knees now without wondering, is this the one? For 6 years I have been courteous to you, even kind and complaisant towards you. Tell me the truth and I give you my word that I will do nothing unkind." In the darkness of the carriage, he thought he could feel that she was moved, and feeling that at last she was going to speak, he said, "I beg you to tell me, I implore you." She murmured, "Perhaps I have been more guilty than you think. But I could not go on with that detestable life of continued pregnancies. There was only one way in which I could drive you from my bed. I lied before God, and I lied with my hand raised to my children's heads, for I never deceived you." He seized her arm in the darkness, and gripping it as he had done on the terrible day when they drove in the park, he stammered, "Is it true?" "Quite true." But, distraught with agony, he groaned, "Oh, I shall be a prey to new doubts that will never end. Which time did you lie, that other day or today? How can I believe you now? How can I believe a woman after that? I shall never know again what to think. I had rather you had said to me, 'It's Jacques,' or 'It's Jean.'" The carriage was turning into the courtyard of the house. When it drew up before the steps, the Comte descended first and as always offered his arm to his wife to mount the steps. "Can I talk to you for a few minutes?" he said. She answered, "I'd like you to." They went into a small sitting room, and a rather surprised footman lit its candles. Then, when they were alone, he went on. How am I to know the truth? I have implored you 1,000 times to speak, you remained silent, impenetrable, inflexible, inexorable, and now you come to me today and tell me that you lied. For 6 years you have found it in your heart to let me believe a thing like that. No, it's now you're lying, I don't know why, out of pity for me, perhaps. She replied, with a grave sincere air. But if I had not lied I should have had 4 more children in the last 6 years. He cried. Is it a mother talking like that? Oh, she said, I don't feel in the least as a mother towards children who are not born, I'm content to be the mother of those I have and to love them with all my heart. We are women of the civilized world. We no longer are and we refuse to be mere females who replenish the earth. She rose, but he seized her hands. One word, only one word, Gabrielle. Will you tell me the truth? I have just told you it. I have never deceived you. He looked her squarely in the face, so lovely as she was, with her eyes grey as cold skies. In her dusky hair, in that shadowy night of black hair, shone the diadem powdered with diamonds like a Milky Way. Then he felt suddenly, by some intuition he felt that this being before him was not only a woman destined to perpetuate her race, but the strange and mysterious product of all our complicated desires, garnered in us by the centuries. Turned aside from primitive and divine goal to wander towards a mystic beauty half-seen and intangible. So that some of them flourish only for our dreams, adorned with all the poetry, the romantic luxury, the conceits and the aesthetic charm that civilization has gathered round woman. This statue of flesh that engenders as many fevers of the senses as immaterial appetites. Her husband remained standing in front of her, dazed by this tardy and obscure discovery, reaching directly back to the cause of his old jealousy and understanding it hardly at all. At last he said, I believe you. I feel that at this moment you are not lying, and indeed it always seemed to me before that you were lying. She held out her hand. We are friends then? He took this hand and kissed it, answering. We are friends. Thank you, Gabrielle. Then he went out, still looking at her, marveling that she was still so lovely, and feeling in himself the birth of a strange emotion, an emotion perhaps more terrible than the simple love of old. Who knows? Chapter 1. My God! My God! So at last I am going to write down what has happened to me. But shall I be able to? Shall I dare? So fantastic, so inexplicable, so incomprehensible, so crazy is it. If I were not certain of what I had seen, certain that there has been in my reasoning no faulty link, no error in my investigations, no lacuna in the relentless sequence of my observations, I would have believed myself to be merely the victim of an hallucination, the sport of a strange vision. After all, who knows? I am today in a private asylum, but I entered it voluntarily, urged thereto by prudence and fear. Only one living creature knows my story. The doctor here. I am going to write it. I hardly know why. To rid myself of it, for it fills my thoughts like an unendurable nightmare. Here it is. I have always been a recluse, a dreamer, a sort of detached philosopher, full of kindly feeling, content with little, with no bitterness against men or resentment against heaven. I lived alone, all my life, because of a sort of uneasiness that the presence of other people induces in me. How can I explain it? I could not explain it. I don't refuse to see people, to talk to them, to dine with friends, but when I have endured their nearness for some time, even those with whom I am most intimate, they weary me, exhaust me, get on my nerves, and I suffer an increasing exasperating longing to see them go or to go myself, to be alone. This longing is more than a desire, it is an irresistible necessity. And if I had to endure the continued presence of the people in whose company I was, if I were compelled, not to listen but to go on for any length of time hearing their conversation, some accident would certainly befall me. What? Ah, who knows? Perhaps merely a fainting fit? Yes, probably that. I have such a passion for solitude that I cannot even endure the nearness of other people sleeping under my roof. I cannot live in Paris because of the indefinable distress I feel there. I die spiritually, and I am as tortured in my body and my nerves by the vast crowd that swarms and lives round me, even when it sleeps. Oh, the slumber of other people is more unendurable than their speech. And I can never rest when at the other side of the wall I am aware of lives held in suspense by these regular eclipses of consciousness. Why am I so made? Who knows? The cause is perhaps quite simple. I am quickly wearied of all that exists outside myself. And there are many people similarly constituted. There are two races dwelling on earth. Those who need other people, who are distracted, occupied and refreshed by other people, and who are worried, exhausted and unnerved by solitude as by the ascension of a terrible glacier or the crossing of a desert. And those, on the other hand, who are wearied, bored, embarrassed, utterly fatigued by other people, while isolation calms them. And the detachment and imaginative activity of their minds bathes them in peace. In effect, this is a usual psychical phenomenon. Some people are made to live an outward life, others to live within themselves. I myself have a short and quickly exhausted power of attention to the outside world, and as soon as it has reached its limit, I suffer in my whole body and my whole mind an intolerable distress. The result is that I attached myself strongly to inanimate things that assume for me the importance of living creatures, and that my house had become a world where I lived a solitary and active life, surrounded by things, furniture, intimate trifles, as sympathetic to my eyes as faces. I had filled it with them little by little. I had decorated it so, and I felt myself housed, content, satisfied, as happy as in the arms of a loving woman whose familiar caress was become a calm and pleasant need. I had had this house built in a beautiful garden which shut it off from the roads, and at the gate of a town where I could, when occasion arose, find the social resources to which, at odd moments, I felt impelled. All my servants slept in a distant building at the end of the kitchen garden, which was surrounded by a great wall. The somber folding down of the nights, in the silence of my habitation, lost, hidden, drowned under the leaves of great trees, was so tranquilizing, so pleasant to me, that every evening I delayed going to bed for several hours, to enjoy it the longer. That particular day, Sigurd had been played at the local theatre. It was the first time I had heard this beautiful fairy-like musical drama, and it had given me the greatest pleasure. I walked home, at a brisk pace, my head full of sounding rhythms, my eyes filled with visions of loveliness. It was dark, dark, so unfathomably dark that I could hardly make out the high road and several times almost went headlong into the ditch. From the toll gate to my house is about 2/3 of a mile, perhaps a little more, maybe about 20 minutes slow walking. It was 1 o'clock in the morning, 1 or half past. The sky was growing faintly light in front of me, and a slip of a moon rose, the wan slip of the moon's last quarter. The crescent moon of the first quarter, that rises at 4 or 5 o'clock in the evening, is brilliant, gay, gleaming like silver, but the moon that rises after midnight is tawny. Sad and sinister, it is a real witch's Sabbath of a moon. Every walker by night must have made this observation. The moon of the first quarter, be it thin as a thread, sends out a small joyous light that fills the heart with gladness and flings clear shadows over the earth. The moon of the last quarter scarcely spreads a dying light, so one that it hardly casts any shadow at all. I saw from some way off the somber mass of my garden, and, sprung from I know not where, there came to me a certain uneasiness at the idea of entering it. I slackened my step. It was very mild. The heavy weight of trees wore the aspect of a tomb where my house was buried. I opened my gateway and made my way down the long avenue of sycamore trees, which led to the house, arched and vaulted overhead like a high tunnel. Crossing shadowy groves and winding round lawns where under the paling shadows clumps of flowers jeweled the ground with oval stains of indeterminate hues. As I approached the house, a strange uneasiness took possession of me. I halted. There was no sound. There was not a breath of air in the leaves. What's the matter with me? I thought. For 10 years I had entered in like manner without feeling the faintest shadow of disquietude. I was not afraid. I have never been afraid at night. The sight of a man, a marauder, a thief, would have filled me with fury, and I would have leaped on him without a moment's hesitation. I was armed, moreover. I had my revolver. But I did not touch it, for I wished to master this sense of terror that was stirring in me. What was it? A presentiment? The mysterious presentiment that takes possession of one's senses when they are on the verge of seeing the inexplicable? Perhaps? Who knows? With every step I advanced, I felt my skin creep, and when I was standing under the wall of my vast house, with its closed shutters, I felt the need of waiting a few moments before opening the door and going inside. So I sat down on a bench under the windows of my drawing room. I remained there, a little shaken, my head leaning against the wall, my eyes open on the shadows of the trees. During these first instants, I noticed nothing unusual round me. I felt a sort of droning sound in my ears, but that often happened to me. It sometimes seems to me that I hear trains passing, that I hear clocks striking, that I hear the footsteps of a crowd. Then shortly, these droning sounds became more distinct, more differentiated, more recognizable. I had been mistaken. It was not the usual throbbing sound of my pulse that filled my ears with these clamorings, but a very peculiar, though very confused noise that came, no doubt about it, from the interior of my house. I made it out through the wall, this continuous noise, which was rather a disturbance than a noise, a confused movement of a crowd of things, as if all my furniture was being pushed, moved out of its place and gently dragged about. Oh, for an appreciable time longer I doubted the evidence of my ears. But when I had pressed myself against a shutter the better to make out this strange disturbance of my house, I became convinced, certain, that something abnormal and incomprehensible was taking place in my house. I was not afraid, but I was, how shall I say it, stunned with astonishment. I did not draw my revolver, having a strong suspicion that I should not need it. I waited. I waited a long time, unable to come to any decision, my mind quite lucid, but wildly anxious. I waited, standing there, listening the whole time to the noise that went on increasing. At times it rose to a violent pitch, and seemed to become a muttering of impatience, of anger, of a mysterious tumult. Then suddenly ashamed of my cowardice, I seized my bunch of keys, I chose the one I wanted, I thrust it in the lock, I turned it twice, and pushing the door with all my force, I sent the door clattering against the inner wall. The crash rang out like a pistol shot, and, amazingly, from top to bottom of my house, a formidable uproar broke out in answer to this explosive sound. It was so sudden, so terrible, so deafening, that I recoiled some steps, and although I still felt it to be useless, I drew my revolver from its holster. I went on waiting, oh, some little time. I could distinguish, now, an extraordinary tap-tapping on the steps of my staircase, on the floors, on the carpets, a tap-tapping, not of shoes, of slippers worn by human beings, but of crutches. Wooden crutches, and iron crutches that rang out like cymbals. And then all at once I saw, on the threshold of my door, an armchair, my big reading chair, come swaggering out. It set off through the garden. Others followed it, the chairs out of my drawing room, then the low couches dragging themselves along like crocodiles on their short legs, then all my chairs, leaping like goats, and the little stools trotting along like hares. Imagine the tumult of my mind. I slipped into a grove of trees, where I stayed, crouched, watching the whole time this march past of my furniture, for they were all taking their departure, one after the other, quickly or slowly, according to their shapes and weight. My piano, my large grand, passed galloping like a runaway horse, with a murmur of music in its depths. The smallest objects gliding over the gravel like ants, brushes, glass dishes, goblets, where the moonlight hung glowworm lamps. The hangings slithered past in whirls, like octopuses. I saw my writing table appear, a rare piece of the last century, which contained all the letters I have received, the whole story of my heart, an old story which caused me so much suffering. And it held photographs too. Suddenly, I was no longer afraid. I flung myself on it and seized it as one seizes a thief, as one seizes a flying woman. But it pursued its irresistible course, and in spite of my efforts, in spite of my anger, I could not even retard its progress. As I was making a desperate resistance to this terrible force, I fell on the ground, struggling with it. Thereupon it tumbled me over, and dragged me over the gravel, and the pieces of furniture that were following it were already beginning to walk over me, trampling over my legs and bruising them. Then, when I had loosed my hold of it, the others passed over my body like a cavalry charge over a dismounted soldier. Mad with fear at last, I managed to drag myself out of the main avenue and to hide myself again among the trees, to watch the disappearance of the meanest, smallest, most overlooked by me, most insignificant objects that had belonged to me. Then far away, in my house, now as full of echoing sounds as empty houses are, I heard the dreadful sound of shutting doors. They clashed shut from top to bottom of the building, until the hall door that I myself, in my mad folly, had opened for their flight, had finally shut itself, last of all. I fled too, running towards the town, and I did not recover my self-control until I was in the streets, and meeting belated wayfarers. I went and rang at the door of a hotel where I was known. I had beaten my clothes with my hands to remove the dust, and I explained that I had lost my bunch of keys, which contained also the key of the kitchen garden, where my servants were sleeping in a house isolated behind the enclosing wall that preserved my fruit and my vegetables from marauding visitors. I buried myself up to my eyes in the bed they gave me. But I could not sleep, and I waited for daybreak, listening to the beating of my heart. I had given orders that my people were to be warned at dawn, and my man knocked on my door at 7 o'clock in the morning. His face seemed convulsed with emotion. "A terrible thing happened last night, sir," he said. "What's that?" "The whole furniture of the house has been stolen, sir, everything, down to the very smallest articles." This news pleased me. Why? Who knows? I had myself absolutely in hand, absolutely determined to dissimulate, to say nothing to anyone about what I had seen, to hide it, bury it in my conscience like a frightful secret. I answered, "They must be the same people who stole my keys. We must warn the police at once. I will get up and be with you in a few moments." The investigations lasted 5 months. They discovered nothing. They did not find the smallest of my possessions, not the faintest trace of the thieves. Lord! If I had told what I knew. If I had told, they would have shut me up, me, not the robbers, but the man who had been able to see such a thing. Oh, I know enough to hold my tongue. But I did not refurnish my house. It was quite useless. The thing would have happened again and gone on happening. I did not want to enter the house again. I did not enter it. I never saw it again. I went to Paris, to a hotel, and I consulted doctors on my nervous state, which had been giving me much uneasiness since that deplorable night. They ordered me to travel. I followed their advice. Chapter 2. I began by traveling in Italy. The sun did me good. For 6 months, I wandered from Genoa to Venice, Venice to Florence, Florence to Rome, Rome to Naples. Then I went over Sicily, a country alike notable for its climate and its monuments, relics of the Greek and Norman occupation. I turned to Africa. I peacefully crossed the huge calm yellow desert over which camels, gazelles and vagabond Arabs wander, and almost nothing haunts the light, crystalline air. Neither by night nor day. I returned to France by Marseilles, and despite the gaiety of the province, the dimmer light of the sky saddened me. Once more I felt, on returning to the continent, the curious fancy of a sick man who believed himself cured and whom a dull pain warns that the flame of his malady is not quite extinguished. Then I came back to Paris. A month later, I was bored with it. It was autumn, and before winter came on, I wanted to make an expedition across Normandy, with which I had no acquaintance. I began at Rouen, of course, and for 8 days I wandered ecstatically, enthusiastically, through this medieval city, in this amazing mirror of extraordinary Gothic monuments. Then about 4 o'clock one afternoon, as I was tempting some unreal street, in which a stream, black as the ink they call Roebeck water, flows, my attention, wholly fixed on the bizarre and antiquated character of the houses, was suddenly distracted by a glimpse of a line of second-hand dealers' shops which succeeded each other from door to door. How well they had chosen, these obscene traffickers in rubbish, their pitch in this fantastic alley, perched above the evil watercourse. Beneath the roofs bristling with tiles and slates on which still creaked the weathercocks of bygone days. In the depths of those dark stairs, all higgledy-piggledy could be seen carved presses, Rouen, netters, Moustier's pottery, painted statues, or some in oak, Christs, Virgins, Saints, church ornaments, chasubles, copes, even chalices, and even painted shrines from which the Almighty has been dismantled. Curious, are they not? These caverns in these tall houses, in these huge towns, filled from cellar to attic with every kind of article whose existence seemed ended, but which outlived their natural owners, their century, their period, their fashion, to be bought by new generations as curiosities. My weakness for trinkets reawakened in this city of antiquaries. I went from stall to stall, crossing in 2 strides the bridges made of 4 rotten planks thrown across the nauseous Roebeck water. Heavens! What a shock! One of my most handsome wardrobes met my eyes at the end of a vault crowded with articles, looking like the entrance to the catacombs of a cemetery for old furniture. I drew nearer, trembling in every limb, trembling so much that I dared not touch it. I put out my hand, I hesitated. It was really it, after all, a unique Louis XIII wardrobe, easily recognizable by anyone who had ever seen it. Suddenly casting my eyes a little further, into the deeper shadows of the shop, I caught sight of 3 of my armchairs, covered with petit point tapestry. Then, still further back, my 2 Henri II tables, so rare that people came to Paris to look at them. Think of my state of mind. But I went on, incapable, tortured with emotion. But I went forward, for I am a brave man, as a knight of the Dark Ages thrust his way into a nest of sorcery. Step by step, I found everything which had belonged to me, my chandeliers, my books, my pictures, my hangings, my armors, everything except the desk full of my letters, which I could see nowhere. I went on, climbing down dim galleries, climbing up to higher floors. I was alone. I shouted, no one answered. I was alone, there was no one in this vast house, tortuous as a maze. Night fell, and I had to sit down in the shadows of my own chairs, for I would not go away. From time to time I called, hello. Hello. Is anyone there? I must have been there for certainly more than an hour when I heard steps, light footsteps, and slow, I don't know where. I was on the point of fleeing, but taking heart, I called once more and saw a light in an adjoining room. Who is there? Said a voice. I replied, a customer. The answer came. It is very late to come into shops like this. I have been waiting for more than an hour, I returned. You could come back tomorrow. Tomorrow, I shall have left Rouen. I did not dare go forward, and he did not come. All the time, I was watching the reflection of his light illuminating a tapestry on which 2 angels hovered above the bodies on a battlefield. It, too, belonged to me. I said, well, are you coming? He answered, I am waiting for you. I rose and went towards him. In the middle of a large room stood a tiny man, tiny and very fat, the fatness of a freak, a hideous freak. He had an extraordinary beard of straggling hair, thin-grown and yellowish, and not a hair on his head. Not a hair. As he held his candle at arm's length to see me the better, his skull looked to me like a little moon in this vast room cluttered with old furniture. His face was wrinkled and swollen, his eyes scarcely visible. I bargained for 3 chairs, which were mine, and paid for them on the spot an enormous sum, giving only the number of my room at the hotel. They were to be delivered before 9 o'clock on the following morning. Then I departed. He accompanied me to the door with many polite expressions. I at once betook me to the head police station, where I related the story of the theft of my furniture and of the discovery I had just made. They immediately asked for information by telegram from the department which had had charge of the burglary, asking me to wait for the reply. An hour later a quite satisfactory answer arrived. "I shall have this man arrested and questioned at once," the chief told me, "for he may possibly have been suspicious and made away with your belongings. If you dine and come back in a couple of hours, I will have him here and make him undergo a fresh examination in your presence." "Most certainly, sir. My warmest thanks." I went to my hotel and dined with a better appetite than I could have believed possible. Still I was contented enough. They had him. 2 hours later I went back to the chief inspector, who was waiting for me. "Well, sir," he said, as soon as he saw me, "they haven't found your man. My fellows haven't been able to put their hands on him." Ah! I felt that I should faint. "But, you have found his house all right?" I asked. "Quite. It will be watched and held until he comes back." But as for himself, vanished. Vanished? Vanished. Usually he spends the evenings with his neighbor, herself a dealer, a queer old witch, Widow Bidoin. She has not seen him this evening and can give no information about him. We must wait till tomorrow. I departed. How sinister, how disturbing, how haunted the streets of Rouen seemed to me. I slept badly enough, with nightmares to drag me out of each bout of sleep. As I did not want to appear either too worried or in too much haste, I waited on the following day until 10 o'clock before going to the police station. The dealer had not appeared. His shop remained closed. The inspector said to me, "I have taken all the necessary steps. The department has charge of the affair. We will go off together to this shop and have it opened, and you shall point out your belongings to me." We were driven there in a carriage. Some policemen with a locksmith were posted in front of the shop door, which stood open. When I entered, I found neither my wardrobe, my armchairs, nor my tables, nor nothing of what had furnished my house, absolutely nothing. Even though on the previous evening I could not move a step without meeting one of my pieces. The inspector, surprised, at first looked at me with distrust. "Good God, sir," I said, "the disappearance of this furniture coincides amazingly with the disappearance of the dealer." He smiled. "True enough. You were wrong to buy and pay for those things of yours yesterday." It put him on his guard. I replied. "What seems incomprehensible to me is that all the places where my furniture stood are now occupied by other pieces." "Oh," answered the inspector, "he had the whole night, and accomplices too, no doubt. This house probably communicates with its neighbors." "Never mind, sir, I am going to move very quickly in this matter. This rogue won't keep out of our hands very long, now we hold his retreat." Ah, my heart, my poor heart, how it was beating. I stayed in Rouen for a fortnight. The man did not return. My God! My God! Is there any man alive who could could overreach him? Then on the morning of the 16th day, I received from my gardener, the caretaker of my pillaged and still empty house, the following strange letter. "Sir, I beg to inform you that last night there occurred something which no one can fathom, the police no more than ourselves. All the furniture has come back, everything without exception, down to the very smallest objects. The house is now exactly the same as it was on the night of the burglary. It is enough to drive one off one's head. It happened during the night of Friday through Saturday. The drive is cut up as if they had dragged everything from the gate to the door exactly as it was on the day of the disappearance. We await you, sir, while remaining. Your obedient servant. Philippe Rodin. No, 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 no. I will never go back there. I took the letter to the police inspector. This restitution has been made very skillfully, he said. Let's pretend to do nothing now. We'll catch our man one of these days. But he is not caught. No. They haven't got him, and I am as afraid of him now as if he was a wild beast lurking behind me. Not to be found. He is not to be found, this moon-headed monster. Never will he be caught. He will never again come back to his house. What does that matter to him? I am the only person who could confront him, and I will not. I will not. I will not. I will not. And if he returns, if he comes back to his shop, who could prove that my furniture was in his place? Mine is the only evidence against him, and I am well aware that it is regarded with suspicion. Oh, no, such a life was no longer bearable. And I could not keep the secret of what I had seen. I could not go on living like anyone else with the dread that such happenings would begin again. I went to see the doctor in charge of this private asylum, and told him the whole story. After questioning me for a long time, he said, "Would you be willing to remain here for some time?" "Very willing." "You have means?" "Yes." "You would like separate quarters?" "Yes." "Would you care to see friends?" "No, not a soul." The man from Rouen might dare, for vengeance' sake, to follow me here. And I have been alone, quite alone, for 3 months. I am almost at peace. I have only one fear. Suppose the antique dealer went mad, and suppose they brought him to this retreat. The prisoners themselves are not safe. Graveyard sirens. The 5 friends were finishing their dinner. There were 2 bachelors and 3 married men, all middle-aged and wealthy. They assembled thus once a month, in memory of old times, and after they had dined they used to sit talking until 2 o'clock in the morning. They were fond of one another's society, and had remained closely united, so these were perhaps the happiest evenings of their lives. They chatted about everything that occupies and amuses Parisians. Their conversation, as in most drawing-rooms, was a sort of spoken rehash of the morning newspapers. One of the liveliest was Joseph de Bardon, a bachelor, who lived the life of a boulevardier most thoroughly and capriciously, without being debauched or depraved. It interested him, and as he was still young, being barely 40, he enjoyed it keenly. A man of the world in the broadest and best sense of the word, he possessed a great deal of wit without much depth, a general knowledge without real learning. Quick perception without serious penetration. But his adventures and observations furnished him many amusing stories, which he told with so much philosophy and humor that society voted him very intellectual. He was a favorite after-dinner speaker, always having some story to relate to which his friends looked forward. Presently he began to tell a story without being asked. Leaning on the table with a half-filled glass of fine champagne in front of his plate, in the smoky atmosphere filled with the fragrance of coffee, he seemed perfectly at ease. Just as some beings are entirely at home in certain places and under certain conditions, as a goldfish in its bowl, for instance, or a pious woman in church. Puffing at his cigar, he said, "A rather curious thing happened to me a little while ago." All exclaimed at once, "Tell us about it." Presently he continued. "You all know how I love to roam around the city, like a collector in search of antiquities. I enjoy watching people and things, everything that happens, and everyone who passes. About the middle of September, the weather being very fine, I went for a walk one afternoon, without a definite purpose. We men always have the vague impulse to call on some pretty woman. We review them in our mind, compare their respective charms, the interest they arouse in us, and finally decide in favor of the one that attracts us most. But when the sun shines brightly and the air is balmy, sometimes we altogether lose the desire for calling. That day the sun was bright and the air was warm, so I simply lighted a cigar and started along the outer boulevard. As I was sauntering along, I thought I would take a look around the cemetery of Montmartre. Now, I have always liked cemeteries because they sadden and rest me, and I need that influence at times. Besides, some of my good friends are laid to rest there, and I go to see them once in a while. As it happens, I once buried a romance in this particular cemetery, an old love of mine, of whom I was very fond, a charming little woman whose memory, while it hurts me, awakens all kinds of regrets. I often dream beside her grave. All is over for her now. I like graveyards because they are such immense, densely populated cities. Just think of all the bodies buried in that small space, of the countless generations of Parisians laid there forever, eternally entombed in the little vaults. In their little graves marked by a cross or a stone, while the living, fools that they are, take up so much room and make such a fuss. Cemeteries have some monuments quite as interesting as those to be seen in the museums. Cavaignac's tomb I liken, without comparing it, to that masterpiece of Jean Goujon, the tombstone of Louis de Brézé in the subterranean chapel in the Cathedral of Rouen. My friends, all so-called modern and realistic art originated there. That reproduction of Louis de Brézé is more lifelike and terrible, more convulsed with agony, than any one of the statues that decorate modern tombs. In Montmartre Cemetery, however, Baudin's monument is admirable, for it is quite imposing. Also the tombs of Gautier and Murger, where the other day I found a solitary wreath of yellow immortelles, laid there, by whom do you suppose? Perhaps by the last grisette, grown old, and possibly become a concierge in the neighborhood. It's a pretty little statue by Millet, but it is ruined by neglect and accumulated filth. Sing of youth, O Murger! Well, I entered the cemetery, filled with a certain sadness, not too poignant, however, and suggesting the thought, if one is well, this is not very cheerful, but I'm not to be put there yet. The impression of autumn, a warm dampness smelling of dead leaves, the pale, anemic rays of the sun, intensified and poetized the sensation of the solitude and of the end of all things, which haunts this place of death. I walked slowly along the alleys of graves where neighbors no longer visit, no longer sleep together, nor read the papers. I began reading the epitaphs. There is nothing more amusing in the world. Labiche and Mailhac have never made me laugh as much as some of these tombstone inscriptions. I tell you, these crosses and marble slabs on which the relatives of the dead have poured out their regrets and their wishes for the happiness of the departed, their hopes of reunion, the hypocrites, make better reading than Paul de Kock's funniest tales. But what I love in the cemetery are the abandoned plots filled with yew trees and cypress, the resting place of those departed long ago. However, the green trees nourished by the bodies will soon be felled to make room for those that have recently passed away, whose graves will be there, under little marble slabs. After loitering a while, I felt tired, and decided to pay my faithful tribute to my little friend's memory. When I reached the grave, my heart was very sad. Poor child! She was so sweet and loving, so fair and white, and now, should her grave be reopened? Bending over the iron railing, I whispered my grief, which she probably never heard, and I turned to leave, when I caught sight of a woman in deep mourning kneeling beside a neighboring grave. Her crape veil was thrown back, disclosing her pretty, fair hair, which seemed in its bands to be illumined under the darkness of her hat. I forgot to leave. She seemed bowed with sorrow. She had buried her face in her hands, and rigid as a statue in meditation, lost in deep regrets, she was living over torturing memories and seemed herself a corpse mourning a corpse. Presently I saw that she was beginning to weep, for I could see a convulsive movement of her back like the rustle of the wind in the willows. She cried gently at first, then more violently with a rapid motion of her back and shoulders. Suddenly she uncovered her face. Her eyes, brimming with tears, were charming. For a moment she gazed around as if awakening from a nightmare. She saw me looking at her and quickly hid her face again, greatly abashed. Now, with convulsive sobs she bent her head slowly over the tombstone. She rested her forehead against it, and her veil, falling around her, covered the whiteness of the beloved sepulchre with a dark shroud. I heard her moan and then saw her fall to the ground in a faint. I rushed to her side and began slapping her hands and breathing on her temples, while reading this simple inscription on the tombstone. Here lies Louis Theodore Carrel, captain in the Marine Infantry, killed by the enemy in Tonkin. Pray for his soul. This death was dated a few months back. I was moved almost to tears, and renewed my efforts to revive the poor girl. At last she came to. I looked deeply moved. I am not so bad looking, and I am not 40, her very first glance showed me that she was likely to be grateful for my care. Between sobs she told me of her marriage to the officer who had been killed in Tonkin within a year after their wedding. He had married her for love, she being an orphan and possessing just barely enough for the usual dowry. I consoled her, comforted her, and assisted her to her feet, saying, "You must not stay here. Come away." "I am unable to walk," she whispered. "Let me help you," I said. "Thank you, you are very kind," she murmured. "Did you also come to mourn someone?" "Yes, madam." "A woman?" "Yes, madam." "Your wife?" "A friend." "One may love a friend just as much as a wife, for passion knows no law," said the lady. "Yes, madam," I replied. And so we left the spot together, she leaning on me and I almost carrying her through the alleys. As we came out, she murmured, "I'm afraid that I'm going to faint. Wouldn't you like to take something, madam?" I inquired. "Yes," she said, "I would." I discovered a restaurant near at hand, where the friends of the dead gather to celebrate the end of their painful duty. We went in, and I made her drink a cup of hot tea, which appeared to give her renewed strength. A faint smile dawned on her lips and she began telling me about herself, how terrible it was to go through life all alone, to be alone at home day and night, to have no one on whom to lavish love, confidence, and intimacy. It all seemed sincere and sounded well coming from her. I was softened. She was very young, perhaps 20. I paid her several compliments that appeared to please her, and as it was growing dark I offered to take her home in a cab. She accepted. In the carriage we were so close to each other that we could feel the warmth of our bodies through our clothing, which really is the most intoxicating thing in the world. When the cab stopped in front of her home she said, "I hardly feel able to walk upstairs, for I live on the 4th floor. You have already been so kind, that I am going to ask you to assist me to my apartment." I consented gladly. She walked up slowly, breathing heavily at each step. In front of her door she added, "Do come in for a few minutes, so that I can thank you again for your kindness." And I, of course, followed her. Her apartment was modest, even a trifle poor, but well kept and in good taste. We sat down side by side on a small divan, and she again began to speak of her loneliness. Then she rang for the maid, so as to offer me some refreshments. But the girl failed to appear, and I joyfully concluded that this maid probably came only in the morning, and was a sort of charwoman. She had taken off her hat. How pretty she was! Her clear eyes looked steadily at me, so clear and so steady that a great temptation came to me, to which I promptly yielded. Clasping her in my arms, I kissed her again and again on her half-closed lids. She repelled me, struggling to free herself and repeating, "Do stop, stop, please. Stop." What did she mean to imply by this word? Under such conditions, to stop could have at least two meanings. In order to silence her, I passed from her eyes to her lips, and gave to the word stop the conclusion I preferred. She did not resist very much, and as our eyes met after this insult to the memory of the departed captain, I saw that her expression was one of tender resignation, which quickly dispelled my misgivings. Then I grew attentive and gallant. After an hour's chat I asked her, Where do you dine? In a small restaurant nearby. All alone? Why, yes. Will you take dinner with me? Where? In a good restaurant on the boulevard. She hesitated a little, but at last consented, consoling herself with the argument that she was so desperately lonely, and adding, I must put on a lighter gown. She went into her bedroom, and when she emerged she was dressed in half-mourning, charming, refined and slender. She apparently had different costumes for street and for cemetery wear. Our dinner was most pleasant and cordial. She drank some champagne, thereby becoming very animated and lively, and we returned to her apartment together. This liaison, begun among tombstones, lasted about 3 weeks. But man tires of everything and especially of women. So I pleaded an urgent trip and left her. I was generous on leaving, for which she was duly thankful, making me promise and even swear that I would come back, for she really seemed to care a little for me. In the meantime I formed other attachments, and a month or so went by without the memory of this love being vivid enough to bring me back to this little graveyard mistress. Still, I had not forgotten her. She haunted me like a mystery, a psychological problem, like one of those inexplicable questions whose solution worries us. I can't tell why, but one day I imagined that I should find her in the Montmartre cemetery. So I went back. I walked around a long time without meeting anyone but the usual visitors of the place, mourners who had not broken off all relations with their dead. The grave of the captain killed in Tonkin was deserted, without flowers, or wreaths. As I was passing through another part of this great city of death, I suddenly saw a couple in deep mourning coming toward me through one of the narrow paths hedged with crosses. When they drew near, oh, surprise! I recognized her. She saw me and blushed. As I brushed past her, she gave me a little wink that meant clearly, don't recognize me, and also seemed to say, come and see me again, dearest. The man who accompanied her was about 50 years old, fine-looking and distinguished, an officer of the Legion of Honor. He was helping her just as I had, when we left the cemetery together. I was utterly nonplussed, reluctant to believe what my eyes had just seen, and I wondered to what strange tribe of creatures this graveyard huntress belonged. Was she merely a clever courtesan, an inspired prostitute, who haunted cemeteries for men disconsolate at the loss of some woman, a mistress or a wife, and hungering for past caresses? Is she unique? Are there others? Is it a profession? Are the cemeteries worked like the streets? Are there graveyard sirens? Or had she alone conceived the idea, wonderful for its deep philosophy, of exploiting the amorous regrets awakened in these funereal places? I would have given a great deal to know whose widow she was that day. After. My dears, you must go to bed, the Countess said. The 3 children, 2 girls and 1 boy, got up and kissed their grandmother, then went to say good night to the priest, who dined at the chateau every Thursday. Abbé Maudet took 2 of them on his knees, putting his long black-covered arms round their necks, and, bringing the 2 heads close together with a paternal gesture, he kissed them tenderly on the brow. Then he put them down. The youngsters went off, the boy leading the way. You love children, your reverence, the Countess remarked. Very much, madam. The old lady raised her clear eyes to the priest and said, and, has solitude never weighed upon you? Yes, sometimes. He was silent, hesitated, then continued, but I was never meant for an ordinary life. What do you know about it? Oh. I know that very well. I was meant to be a priest. I have followed my vocation. The Countess, still looking at him, said, Come, your reverence, tell me how you came to renounce all that makes the rest of us love life, all that brings us support and consolation. Who induced you, what made you decide to turn aside from the broad path natural to man, from marriage, from family life? You are neither fanatical, exalted, gloomy nor sad. Was it some event in your life, some sorrow, which decided you to take the vows? Abbé Maudet rose and, crossing the room, held up his heavy country shoes to the fire. He seemed to be still hesitating. He was a tall, white-haired old man who had officiated in the commune of Saint-Antoine-du-Rocher for 20 years. The peasants all said, "There's a good man for you." He was indeed a good man, benevolent, friendly, gentle and, above all, generous. Like Saint Martin, he would have divided his coat in two. He laughed readily and it took little to make him cry like a woman. This rather prejudiced the hard-headed villagers against him. The old Countess de Seville, who had retired to her Château du Rocher to educate her grandchildren after the death of her son and daughter-in-law, was very fond of her priest. And said, "He's a great heart." Every Thursday he spent the evening with the lady of the manor. They had become fast friends in their old age. With half a word they understood each other on almost every subject, being both of them good in a simple, natural way. She insisted, "Come, your reverence, it is your turn to confess." He repeated, "I was not meant for an ordinary life." I realized that in time, fortunately, and I have often made the remark that I was right. My parents, who were rather wealthy drapers at Verdiers, were very ambitious on my account. I was sent to a boarding school very young. No one knows what a child suffers at school, lonely and separated from his own people. That monotonous life, bereft of all affection, is good for some, but hateful for others. The young are often much more sensitive than they are thought to be, and by cooping them up too early away from those they love, an excess of sensitiveness may be developed and may become abnormal and full of danger. I rarely played, I had no companions and spent my time in longing for home. I cried in bed at night, and racked my brains for memories of my home life, unimportant memories of trifling things. I was always thinking of all I had left behind me, and gradually I turned into a visionary to whom the slightest disappointment was a terrible grief. Moreover, I remained taciturn, reserved, shrinking and friendless. The ferment of exaltation was working within me obscurely but surely. Children's nerves are easily excited. Care should be taken that they live in really peaceful surroundings until their characters are nearly formed. But whoever considers that an unjust imposition may be as great a grief to some schoolboys as the death of a friend will be later on? How many realize that some youngsters suffer terribly for a mere trifle, and become sick, miserable souls in a very short time? Such was the case with me. This faculty for grieving developed to such a degree that my whole life became a martyrdom. I told no one about it. I said nothing, but gradually I became so acutely sensitive that my whole being was like a running sore. Everything that touched upon it produced twinges of pain, horrible reactions, and consequently caused permanent injury. Happy the man whom nature has girt with indifference and armed with stoicism. I reached my 16th year. Owing to this aptitude for unlimited suffering, I was extremely timid. Feeling open to every attack of chance or fate, I shrank from all contact with others, every friendly advance, and from participation in any event. I was on the alert, as if constantly menaced by some unknown but anticipated misfortune. I dared neither to speak nor to act in public. I felt that life was a battle, a terrific struggle in which one receives tremendous blows, painful, deadly wounds. Unlike human beings who indulge in hopes for a happy future, I felt nothing but vague dread and wanted to hide myself away to avoid the conflict in which I would surely be overcome and killed. As soon as I had finished school, I was given 6 months' holiday in which to choose a career. A very simple event made me suddenly see myself quite clearly, showed me how ill I was mentally, made me realize the danger I was in, and decide to escape from it. Verdiers is a small town surrounded by plains and woods. Our house was in the principal street, and I spent my days far from the home I had so much regretted, so longed for, when at school. All kinds of dreams stirred within me, and I tramped the fields alone to allow them to escape, to find their wings. My father and mother, entirely preoccupied with the business and my future, only talked to me about sales and my plans for the future. They loved me in their positive and practical way. They loved me much more with their head than with their heart. I lived shut up within my thoughts, trembling at my eternal apprehensiveness. Then one evening, after a long walk, as I was returning in a great hurry so as not to be late, I caught sight of a dog running towards me. It was a kind of red spaniel, very thin, with long, wavy ears. When it was about 10 yards away it stopped, so did I. Then it started to wag its tail and creep slowly towards me with a frightened wriggling of its body, bending its legs as if in supplication, gently moving its head from side to side. I called it. Then it pretended to crawl along so humbly, so sadly, so entreatingly, that I felt my eyes fill with tears. I went nearer, it ran away, then came back, and I put one knee on the ground, speaking to it very gently so as to attract it. At last it came within arm's length and I patted it very gently, taking care not to frighten it away. Getting bolder, it gradually raised itself, put its paws on my shoulders and began to lick my face, and followed me home. It was the first live thing that I loved with passion, because it loved me in return. My affection for the animal was certainly exaggerated and ridiculous. I felt vaguely that we were brothers who had strayed into the world, both of us lonely and defenseless. It never left me, slept at the foot of my bed, ate at table in spite of my parents' disapproval, and accompanied me on my solitary walks. I would often stop by the hedgeside and sit down on the grass. Sam would come running up to me, lie down by my side or on my knee, and raise my hand with his muzzle to make me pat him. One day towards the end of June I saw the Ravereau coach coming along the road from Saint-Pierre-de-Chavreau. The yellow box with its black leather top over the outside seats was being hurried along by the 4 galloping horses. The driver was cracking his whip, and a cloud of dust rose from the wheels of the heavy carriage, floating behind it like a cloud. As the coach was passing me, Sam suddenly dashed in front of it. Frightened, perhaps, by the noise, he was trying to join me. He was knocked down by one of the horses and I saw him roll over, then get up and fall down flat. The coach gave 2 big jerks. I caught sight of something stirring in the dust where it had passed. He was nearly cut in 2, his torn entrails were hanging out of his body in a torrent of blood. He tried to get up, to walk, but could only move his 2 front legs, which were scratching the ground as if trying to make a hole. The hind legs were already dead. Mad with pain, the dog was howling terribly. In a few minutes he was dead. I cannot express what I felt nor how I suffered. For a whole month I never left my room. Then, one evening, my father, furious at the state I was in for such a trifle, exclaimed, "What will you do when real sorrow befalls you, when you lose your wife, your children? It's impossible to be so stupid." These words haunted me. What will you do when real sorrow befalls you, when you lose your wife, your children? I began to see myself clearly. I saw how it was that an ordinary occurrence seemed as important to me as a great calamity. I realized that I was ordained to suffer horribly, and, aggravated by my sick sensitiveness, to be alive to every painful impression, and a panic fear of life seized me. I had no ambition, no desires. I decided to sacrifice all the possible joys of life in order to avoid the certain suffering. I said to myself, life is short, I will spend it in serving others, in easing their burdens and rejoicing in their happiness. As neither joy nor sorrow can touch me personally, any emotion I may feel will be weakened. And yet if you knew how I am tormented, scarred by the misery of the world. But what would have been unbearable anguish has been converted into commiseration, pity. I could never have borne the suffering I see all round me had it been my own. I should have died in seeing my own child die, and, in spite of myself, I have still such an obscure, penetrating dread of life, that every time the postman comes to the presbytery I tremble with apprehension, although I have now nothing to fear. Abbé Maudet ceased talking. He was gazing at the fire in the big, open hearth as if looking for mysterious signs. Those hidden secrets of life which he might have experienced had he been less afraid of suffering. He continued in a low voice. I was right. I was not made for this life. The Countess said nothing. Then, after a long silence, she exclaimed. I should not have the courage to go on living if it were not for my grandchildren. The priest got up to go without another word. The servants were dozing in the kitchen, so the countess accompanied him to the door leading into the garden, and watched his big, slow shadow, reflected in the gleam from a lamp, disappear into the night. Then she returned to her seat by the fire and thought of many things that one never thinks of in one's youth. The peddler. To our still young and inexperienced minds, how many fleeting associations, trifling things, chance meetings, humble dramas that we witness, guess at, or suspect, become as it were guiding threads that lead gradually to a knowledge of the desolating truth about life. As I dream idly of the past while roaming aimlessly about the country, my head in the clouds, little forgotten things, grave and gay, flash constantly through my mind and then take their flight like the hedge birds on my path. This summer, as I was wandering along a road in Savoy that overlooks the right bank of the Lake of Bourget, gazing upon the mass of shimmering blue water of a most unusual blue, pale, and streaked with the slanting rays of the setting sun, my heart was stirred with the emotion I have always felt, since childhood, for the smooth surface of lake, river, and sea. On the other bank of the immense watery plain whose ends stretched away out of sight, one in the direction of the Rhône and the other towards Bourget, the high jagged mountain rose to the last peak of the Dent du Chat. On either side of the road grapevines reached out from tree to tree, smothering the slender branches round which they twined under their leaves, spreading over the fields in green, yellow, and red garlands dotted with clusters of black grapes, which swung gaily between the tree trunks. The road was dusty, white, and deserted. Suddenly a man bending under a heavy load stepped out from the grove of tall trees that encloses the village of Saint Innocent, and came in my direction, leaning on a stick. As he approached I saw he was a hawker, one of those wandering peddlers who sell from door to door throughout the countryside, and suddenly a memory of bygone days, a trifle, flashed into my mind. Simply a meeting at night between Argenteuil and Paris when I was 25. At that time boating was the pleasure of my life. I had a room at a cheap eating house in Argenteuil, and every evening I caught the civil service train, that long slow train which deposits at station after station a crowd of fat, heavy men carrying small parcels, whose unattractive figures are due to lack of exercise, and the shocking fit of their trousers to the chairs provided in government offices. The train, which smelt of offices, cardboard boxes and official documents, landed me at Argenteuil, where my yawl awaited me, ready to skim over the water. With long strokes I set off for Bezons, Chatou, Epinay, or Saint-Ouen, where I dined. Then I went back, put away my boat, and, when there was a full moon, started off on foot for Paris. Well, one night, on the white road, I saw a man walking in front of me. Oh, I was constantly meeting those night travelers of the Parisian suburbs so much dreaded by belated citizens. This man went slowly on before me, weighed down by a heavy load. I soon overtook him, my footsteps echoing on the road. He stopped, turned round, then crossed the road as if to avoid me. As I was hurrying by he called out, "Hello. Good evening, sir." I replied, "Good evening, mate." He went on, "Are you going far?" "To Paris." "You won't be long, you are going at a good pace." "I can't walk quickly, my load is too heavy." I slackened my pace. Why was the man talking to me? What was he carrying in that big bundle? Vague suspicions of crime darted through my mind and made me curious. Every morning the newspapers contain so many accounts of crimes committed in this very spot, at Gennevilliers, that some of them must be true. Such things are not invented merely to amuse readers, all this catalogue of arrests and varied misdeeds which fill up the columns. However, this man's voice sounded rather scared, not at all bold, and up to the present his manner had been more courteous than aggressive. In my turn I began to question him. "And you, are you going far?" "No farther than Asnières." "Do you live at Asnières?" "Yes, sir, I am a peddler by trade and I live at Asnières." He had left the sidewalk where the foot passengers walk in the daytime under the shade of the trees, and moved up towards the middle of the road. I did the same. We eyed each other suspiciously, holding our sticks in our hands. When I got near enough I felt quite reassured. He apparently felt the same, for he asked, "Would you mind going a little slower?" "Why?" "Because I don't like this road by night. I am carrying goods on my back, and two are always better than one. Two men together are seldom attacked." I knew that he was right and that he was afraid. So yielding to his wish, the stranger and I walked along side by side, at 1 o'clock in the morning on the road from Argenteuil to Asnières. "Why, when it is so risky, are you going home so late?" I asked my companion. He told me all about it. He had not intended to go back that evening, as he had set out that very morning with a big enough stock to last 3 or 4 days. But sales had been very good, so good that he was obliged to return home immediately in order to be able to deliver orders next day. He explained with real satisfaction that he was an able salesman, having the gift of words. And that he managed to dispose of things that were awkward to carry by the display of trifles and a fund of amusing patter. He added, "I have a shop at Asnières. My wife keeps it." "Oh. So you are married?" "Yes, sir, 15 months ago. I have found a good little wife. She will be surprised when she sees me back tonight." He told me about his marriage, how he had wanted the girl for over 2 years but she had not been able to make up her mind. Since her childhood she had kept a small shop at the corner of the street where she sold all sorts of things, ribbons, flowers in summer, and chiefly very pretty shoe buckles. With other trifles of which she was able to make a speciality owing to the kindness of a manufacturer. She was well known in Asnières as Bluette, so called because she often wore blue. She earned good money because she was very capable in everything she did. She did not seem to be very well at present, and he thought she must be enceinte, but was not sure. Their business was thriving, and his special job was to travel about showing samples to the small shopkeepers in the neighboring districts. He was becoming a kind of traveling commission agent for certain manufacturers, and at the same time he worked for himself. "And you, what do you do?" he said. I started to bluff. I said that I had a sailing boat at Argenteuil and 2 racing yawls, that I came for a row every evening and, as I was fond of exercise, I sometimes returned to Paris, where I was engaged in professional work which, I led him to infer, paid me well. He remarked, well, if I had the tin you have, I would not amuse myself by trudging the roads at night. It isn't safe along here." He cast a sidelong glance at me and I wondered whether, after all, he was not some cunning evildoer anxious to avoid useless risk. I felt reassured when he murmured, "Not so fast, if you please. My pack is heavy." As we saw the houses of Asnières in the distance he said, "I am near home now, for we don't sleep at the shop, which is guarded at night by a dog that is the equal of 4 men. Besides, rooms are far too dear in the center of the town. Now, listen, sir, you have rendered me a great service, for I don't feel happy on the road with my pack. So now you must come in and drink a glass of warmed wine with my wife, if she wakes up, that is to say, for she sleeps soundly and does not like to be roused. Then without my pack I am not afraid, so, thick stick in hand, I'll see you to the gates of the city." I declined the invitation, he insisted, and I persisted in my refusal. Then he got so excited about it, was so genuinely distressed, and asked me with an air of wounded pride whether I would not drink with a man like him, that I ended by giving in and followed him along a lonely road to one of those big dilapidated houses to be found on the outskirts of the suburbs. I hesitated at the door. The big barraque-like building must be a thieves' resort, a den of suburban robbers, but the peddler made me go first through the unlocked door and, with his hand on my shoulders, guided me through complete darkness while I groped towards a staircase, feeling that at any moment I might fall through some hole into a cellar. When I had struck the first step he said, "Go up, we live on the 6th story." I found a box of very large wax matches in my pocket and was able to light up the darkness. He followed me panting under the weight of his pack as he repeated, "It's a long way up. It's a long way." When we were at the top of the house, he took out the key, fastened to his coat by a string, opened the door, and bade me enter. The room was simply whitewashed. There was a table in the middle, 6 chairs, and a kitchen cupboard against the wall. "I am going to call my wife," he said, "then I'll go to the cellar to fetch some wine, it won't keep up here." He went over to one of the 2 doors opening out of the room, and called, "Bluette! Bluette!" As Bluette made no reply he shouted louder, "Bluette! Bluette!" Then, banging at the door with his fists, he muttered, "Confound you, won't you wake up?" He waited and put his ear to the keyhole and said in a quieter tone, "Well, never mind, if she is asleep, I must let her sleep. I am going to fetch the wine, I'll be back in 2 minutes." He disappeared. I sat down and made the best of a bad job. What had I come for? All of a sudden I gave a start, for I heard low voices, cautious, almost silent, movements in the wife's bedroom. The devil! I must have fallen into a trap. Why had all the noise made by her husband, that banging on the door, not wakened this Bluette? It must have been a signal to his accomplices, "There is a mouse in the trap. I'll watch the exit, you do the rest." They were getting excited in the room, they were turning the key in the lock. My heart beat rapidly and I retreated to the far end of the room, murmuring, "Well, I must defend myself," and, seizing a chair in both hands, I prepared for a lively struggle. The door opened slightly and a hand appeared, holding it ajar, then a head, a man's head wearing a round felt hat, slid along between the door and the wall, and 2 eyes were staring at me. Then, so quickly that I had not time to think of defending myself, the man, the supposed criminal, a big chap with bare feet, evidently hurriedly dressed, without a tie, his shoes in his hand. A fine-looking specimen, indeed, who might be described as almost a gentleman, made one bound for the door and disappeared down the stairs. I sat down again. This was beginning to be interesting. I waited for the husband, who was a long time getting the wine. At last I heard him coming upstairs and the sound of his steps made me laugh, one of those forlorn laughs so difficult to suppress. He came into the room bringing 2 bottles and asked, "Is my wife still asleep? You have not heard her moving about?" I knew that she must be listening, and I said, "No, I have heard nothing." Then he called again, "Pauline," but there was still no reply, no sound of anyone moving, so he explained to me, "You see, she doesn't like me to come home at night and have a drop with a friend." "So you think she is not asleep?" "Of course, she is not." He seemed annoyed but said, "Well, let us have a drink," and all at once he seemed to be quite determined to go on until both bottles were empty. This time I was decided. I drank a glass and got up to go. He no longer suggested accompanying me, and, glancing at his wife's door with a sullen scowl, the scowl of anger peculiar to the lower classes, of a brute whose violence is held in check, he muttered, "She will have to open the door when you are gone." I stared at the coward, now furious with a rage he could not explain, that was perhaps due to some obscure presentiment, the instinct of the betrayed male who dislikes closed doors. He had talked about her kindly, now he was certainly going to beat her. He shouted as he shook the door again, "Pauline." A sleepy voice replied from the other side of the wall, "Eh? What? Didn't you hear me come in?" "No, I was asleep, go to hell. Open the door. When you are alone. I don't like you to bring men back with you at night for a drink." Then I left, stumbling down the stairs, just as the other had done, whose accomplice I was. And as I started off for Paris, I thought that in that wretched home I had witnessed a scene of the eternal drama which is being played every day, in every form, in every country.